Oh, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, everyone. Appreciate you guys making time and getting in here. And I know there's a lot of awesome talks today and good vibes, and I really appreciate being a part of that. So, you know, my name's Jason Snell. I don't know, a little bit of everything, I guess. Like we're all in the Midwest here, I feel like, and we all throw that word around hustle and all that good stuff. But I feel like, I probably when I got out of college and growing up, we were all drawing every day and having a lot of fun with that stuff. And that turns into like college and trying to figure some things out there. And, for me after that, I worked at like, I don't know, tons of agencies, everywhere from Cincinnati, Dayton, went out to Seattle, Portland, Austin, New York, a little bit of that stuff. But I always kind of got sucked back to Cincinnati, where I've been for like 15 years now. So I ended up working, like I said, for a bunch of different agencies, and I kind of figured out like I was doing a lot of stuff at night, and it kept me up really late. So once I started kind of realizing that whole thing of, I was working longer at night on freelance stuff than my day job, I said, let's start working from my dining room table full time. So I kind of left the cubicle world, if you will, to a dining room setup, yelling at my cat all day, and learning a lot of lessons through all of that. So I just kind of wanted to share a little bit briefly before I get into like what I do a lot of now. Mostly through the whole journey of everything, it's been, I started off doing a lot of illustration, a lot of motion work. I've done stuff for different music videos. This thing called Luminosity, which was really crazy. I was able to animate a bunch of Charlie Harper's work, if you're familiar. Charlie Harper's crazy. He from the 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, he kind of was doing vector work with paintbrushes before anything called Adobe was ever thought of. I do a lot of stuff with music and bands and rock and roll. I have my own music festival we've been doing for 11 years now down in Northside, little neighborhood in Cincinnati. Doing stuff for like Virgin America, Art Academy, Brandery, illustration work, stuff for, big name, small name, and all in between. And recently, what I really wanted to start getting into is really knowing my neighbors, really knowing my community. When I said I wanted to have a brick and mortar shop in Over the Rhine in Cincinnati, one of the things I really started digging into is the history of what was happening around me, what was going on. Being a fan of like sports and illustration growing up and drawing and all that stuff, I was gravitated toward really crappy teams, like the Bengals. So, I'm kind of a super fan. So I kind of like infiltrated that whole Bengals media stuff and started doing this character I called Mr. Satin. So that was like just having fun with like a local station there, and having a couple buddies who had cameras and were like, hey, let's shoot some silly videos and just tell our story, man on the street. So it was one of those things of like, just like, never saying no. If you have an idea, just like go for it, even though if it dies and crashes, whatever, like you gave it a shot, right? Having fun. So that kind of led me to doing like a bunch of like just silly things where like there was like music videos and like man on the street. I got to meet like one of my childhood like heroes, like Anthony Munoz, like the only Bengal in the Hall of Fame, which was kind of awesome, but he was cool, So from that, I just said, what's really important, as Bob was saying earlier, is people. So I didn't want to just do things in my brick and mortar. I was always hiding in the back, and I couldn't really get up there to answer questions, and people would peek in and be like, what is this weird place? With Vikings, what's that stuff? So it was time to kind of get a little serious and say, all right, let's think about some clients that we can like really build a team, so it's not just me like hiding in the back or hiding behind this Viking term and whatever that was. So right now, Vikings, where we've moved over, I have a bunch of collaborative partners with Brandon, another guy who looks just like a Viking, more so than me even. He kind of has become the mascot, really. He's a print guru. Matt in the back, print crazy. Ava, she does like a little bit of everything. And Phil is an awesome designer illustrator too. So, it's one of those things. It's just like we can't do everything. I feel like the DIY model is great and it's awesome, and we all were a part of that huge movement. But I think now it's really important to lean on your community and your neighbors and your buddies. And and once you kind of have a space, and we have regular hours, we're like 10 to 6, Monday through Friday. You can come in, you can see our process. We have these big windows on 14th and Walnut Street where you can actually like stop and look at the printing process going. You can actually like see what's happening, see people like, constructing posters or T-shirts or any number of crazy things. But what I've learned over the last few years doing this is you got to be able to say no. Sometimes even your best friends who probably you don't charge much, can be kind of the worst clients sometimes with continue to ask and ask and ask, and you want to keep saying yes, 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 but sometimes you got to put on the brakes. And that helps to build to recognize what we do is important, and what we're doing and creating takes time, and there's value there. So this is the front of the shop here. This is We Become Vikings. I thought getting back to the history component, getting back to the education, and knowing your neighborhood, knowing your block, started really digging in to asking questions. What happened here 100 years ago? What happened here 50 years ago? There's so much civic stuff that, happened here and obviously in Cincinnati, where, it wasn't always cool. There wasn't always $5 coffees and things like that. And there were stories about record shops and record labels that had happened on our block. The Cincinnati strongman, the world's strongest man, lived on this street and did his thing. And I was like, what's happening there? What are these stories? What is going on here? So I feel like it's really important, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, is to sort of know the history, know the fabric, know the people that are living there now. What happened there before? So with that discovery and talk about community and what was happening there and what was going on, and even over the Rhine for me in Cincinnati, I started discovering these really crazy, amazing stories. And there's a really great community art program there called Artworks, and they work with a lot of high school kids and to create murals, to paint murals, and they actually get paid, and that's a summer job. All summer long, you're up on scaffolding, you're painting, you're getting dirty, you're meeting new kids from different neighborhoods coming together. And I said, you guys are doing great work. This is awesome, but I think we're missing one component, and storytelling in our neighborhood. Why don't we start talking about the heroes that were here before us? And the first thing that came out of that was the Cincinnati strongman, Henry Holtgruey. And the story of that was he was an immigrant. He came here from Germany. He set up shop. He worked in, he had a couple different saloons down on over the Rhine Vine Street. And he challenged, people from vaudeville kind of challenged him to feats of strength. There wasn't the internet back in 1900. There was people lifting up cases of ice, and they're like, this was a cool thing, right? So these sort of feats of strength were this big thing that was pretty heavy hitting in the world. So he said, no, I'm going to raise my family. I don't want to travel around with the vaudeville circuit, but when you come in town, I got your back. I'm going to put you up. We're gonna do this thing on a stage, and best man wins kind of thing. And he won a majority of the time. So he became the world's strongest man living in Over the Rhine. So I said, let's tell these stories, let's really get in and, give not only people that live there, but the kids who are coming up, a thing of purpose, they can look to a mural and say, you know what, I can be that, I can do that. I have, something that I can look forward to when I walk down the street and discover these stories. So work with them, created this legend series. So now we have from the past 4 years, we have 6 different murals from Ezra Charles, who's a heavyweight champion of the world, who did a lot of really amazing things in the neighborhood, to Strongman, to Annie Oakley, to a lot of these figures that did great things in the neighborhood. And what better way to get the community involved with kids painting these things, right, and getting paid. I would have loved to have done that if I was a teenager. So this is some of those images from that. We even had the mayor that was there. That was really cool, talking about it. Another really awesome discovery about this was when the family found out. I had no idea that there was all these family members there. And the really cool, one of the days where I was hiding in the back of my shop, and I had this image of the strong man, like we're gonna do this thing on Vine Street. It's gonna be really cool. I had like this girl knock on my door, and I kind of when I was getting up, I heard her talking to a friend. They're like, "What's my great great grandfather doing in this shop?" So from there, I realized that there's family members, there's still people in the community that care and know this story. But let's just help tell that on a bigger stage. Another project, really getting inspired by the neighborhood and just wanting to be a good vibes ambassador for my community. There's a place called People's Liberty. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. They give out small loans, small grants to folks in the neighborhood with ideas. So my wife and I, we went to them and said, "Hey, we got this idea about vending machines. A little bit of a pay it forward kind of thing, but we feel like it's an all age thing. We want to go and find a bunch of old vending machines and repurpose them with color and this mission of good eggs, which is you pay 50 cents or a quarter. Now you're vested. You get this egg. You have a badge. You have a wearable." And then you have a message with that to do something good in your community, like pick up a piece of trash, tell someone you love them, or claim someone's fart in the elevator. Like really, really like fun things for everyone, right? So that went on, and we did that in the gallery right across the street from Finley Market in Cincinnati. It ended up doing really well, a lot of traction on social and photographs and things like that. And when it was done, we realized that we need to take this outside of the gallery, right? Like it was cool. We got we were able to get funding to do that, but we're like, the power of this is going to be out in the streets. So we went back to them and said, "Hey, can we have another, small grant to get this moving outside?" So we ended up doing 12 machines. They're kind of in the wild in Cincinnati right now. And we're talking to ambassadors in Indianapolis and Portland about doing their own good eggs, which is super cool. So now we're kind of putting some documentation on how every neighborhood can kind of do their own good eggs and have some fun out there, which is really cool. So this was some photos from the opening and some of us kind of working on it and obviously kids having some fun. Let's see here. So another big thing that we super love doing in our community down at the shop is inviting folks in, right? Like to kind of see process and see how like kind of what's in the sauce, what we're working on. And one of the things that happens a lot of is these things called Final Fridays, which in the neighborhood is everybody opens their door from like 5 to like 9 and kind of celebrate the neighborhood and all things wonderful. So one of the things we thought to do was, all of us that work at the shop are in bands. We're all like going out and seeing bands like every other night and having some fun with that stuff. And, we support that culture with doing poster prints, T-shirts, a lot of that good stuff for some of our favorite bands, locally and nationally. And one of the things we thought would be really cool is, kids don't go out to shows at midnight, or they shouldn't be, right? Like if they're like 12 years old, right? So we thought, like, let's open our doors from like 5:30 to like 8, Final Friday, have a super cool band, a traveling band, each month to celebrate. So younger kids can actually see like actual rock and roll music, people having some fun. We actually have a sponsor, I think is Cleveland. They do a lot of work here called Platform Brewery, which is pretty cool. So they stepped up and are helping us out. They're kind of moving into Cincinnati. But our gift back to the musicians we're going to print a bunch of shirts. We're going to do shirts and we're going to do shirts and posters. We'll design them. We'll work with you on a design. And we'll print those and we'll give them to you and you can sell them. So, you can take that, sell them in our shop, and you can have 100% of whatever you make from that. So it's not like we're giving them like cash per se, but we're like, hey, we're going to feed you. We're going to have some beverages and, take this and sell it. And we've been doing this now for like 6 months, and every show that we've done, we've actually sold out of their merch. We're noticing that like kids want this stuff, right? They had no idea that like a band like in their neighborhood was this good, or that they could have fun and actually see them and purchase goods. So it's been a really awesome, fun experiment to get really great talent in there, and it's just been a lot of fun lately. Another thing too that we've been working on we've been working on this for like 2.5 years right now, which is pretty crazy. We fell in love with the Ezra Charles story a couple years ago when we worked on the mural. And another thing to do was let's continue this community story. Let's continue this amazing work that Ezra Charles did in the community, where he was a man that spoke 3 languages. He was a tailor. He was part owner in the Cotton Club, which is a really big jazz club down there. So a lot of these people were connected like in the 50s and 60s, and we want to kind of tell his story. So we've been working with this amazing sculptor for a couple years now, as well as the West End community, to erect a 14-foot bronze sculpture of Ezra Charles. And we've been working on this campaign for like 2 years, and finally, like in the last week, they said yes. There's been like scandals with the city to the Parks Board to all this kind of stuff, people getting fired. And we're like, well, wait a second. Like, don't forget about Ezra Charles. This is his neighborhood. This is his park. This is where he grew up, and the boxing scene there still is pretty vibrant, which is really cool. So we've been working with the community, not just coming in saying we're going to do this. We've been actually working with people there to demonstrate not only our love of Ezra Charles and our work with Ezra Charles, but we want to make this truly interactive, and it's going to be one of the first like bronze figurative sculptures to be interactive in the world, actually. So you'll be able to kind of like box with Ez. You'll be able to like run his route. He had crazy routes all around Cincinnati and things like that, and just general information about him. This is like sort of where we started, but now we have this like really cool ring that we're doing. And there's like beacons dropped in there. So we're going to have some really fun digital applications that happen with it, where, like I said, you can box with them, and just a lot of like really fun things for kids to kind of get excited about in the neighborhood. So this last project that's kind of been working on, it started probably like 2 or 3 years ago when I first started working with a handful of King Record artists in Cincinnati. Figured out there's this thing called King Records, and I had no idea what it was. And a lot of us musicians and designers, they didn't really tell us about this stuff when we were growing up, and we just had no idea what King Records did, and like the civic pride in the music that really truly happened 75 years ago. And so what I dug in, started really getting into the history of it. Again, I love working on projects that talk about history, that talk about neighborhood, education, and the power that design can have in that. The power that you can truly give back and discover new ways of telling really old stories that I feel like are very important for the youth to understand as we move forward and grow as not just designers, but as like good ambassadors of our neighborhood, which we all should be. It's got to start somewhere, right? So I've been working with the public library, Brian Powers, who works there. He's like the main Cincinnati historian, and he's given me lots of awesome information. And then a couple like breweries and pubs, like kind of some of the old guys who run that stuff, like really know the history, and actually started introducing me to some of the artists that were on there. One is Philip Paul. He's 92 years old. He still practices. He still plays like every Saturday night at the Symphony Hotel. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as like the backbeat of rock and roll music in Cleveland. He played on like songs like Fever and Train Kept Rolling, but he still practices, and like nobody knows who this guy is, and he's amazing, and he dresses like in a suit every day. It's just awesome. So started talking to him and this guy right here in the middle, Otis Williams and the Charms. This guy helped write a bunch of music that helped really discover rock and roll. And as I'm digging through this stuff, I found that like Sid Nathan, this big guy in the corner down here, like was the guy who in 1943 like brought white and black people together to realize that like from 700 WW, these guys would walk over, these old like hillbilly guys who were on the radio making music and hanging out with him at his record shop. Found out that, later on that night, they're going down to the jazz clubs because that's what's happening, So he said, you know what, I'm gonna blend these two things down in downtown over around Cincinnati, and what's gonna happen is he's gonna create genres and genres of music, from jump blues to that guy in the corner right there, James Brown, funk, invented funk with the song called Cold Sweat. In Cincinnati, that was the first funk song. So for me as a designer, I'm getting so hyped and excited about this stuff. I'm like, how can I give back? What can I do as a designer? What kind of gift and tools and creativeness can I give after consuming all this information for a year? So the first one was we did this really cool installation at Blink last year, which was a bunch of projections on buildings. And I had Philip Paul narrate and tell his story of King Records in 10 minutes. So that was projected on this huge side of the building, and we animated all this stuff, and it kind of told a little bit what I've been talking about with King Records. And this year they're not doing that, so I said we gotta do something else. We gotta do something creative. It's like once you feel the power of storytelling and something that hasn't been discovered, and that it's important to some people, you don't want to stop, right? You want to keep telling that story. So found out this is the 75th anniversary of King Records, and no one's doing any sort of celebratory gala or any kind of anything with that stuff. The city is not even owning that and telling that story. So I said, let's gather up, who's left. Let's gather up some creatives and some folks that are into King Records, into music, into continuing to tell that story, and let's promote this. So we're doing this huge gala next month. At Memorial Hall, which is a really cool setup, pretty sweet, and working our tail off to do things like this. How do we bring people in to tell these stories? I've been talking to Bootsy and his members, and now we're even talking to Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and all these guys, all these people who are know this music, right? They know it, they sample it. James Brown's been sampled the most in the history of music. So you start pushing it, you start doing it with graphics, you start doing it with visuals, and then it starts to become real, right? And I feel that's kind of a lot of, as designers, that's what we need to do, right? Anybody, I think nowadays, can design a logo. And there's lots of people that do it amazing. It's awesome, it's great. But to truly put that behind some beef and to put that behind a story, that's where it's powerful. And that's what we try to do is to find these stories now. We realize if I get excited about something, chances are someone else will too. And hopefully someone with a couple bucks will get excited too, that we can help kind of pay for that, right? So, in closing, I wanted to kind of leave a couple minutes for questions, anything like that. I want to say, thank you so much for allowing me to jump up here and tell my story a little bit. And real quick, a lot of people kind of ask me about the name, We Have Become Vikings. What is that? That's silly. It started when I got out of school, and it started where I was really looking at a lot of cool motion houses on the coast, right? We always sit there and reference East and West Coast with that stuff, I feel like. And there's things like Team Awesome and Stink Digital and all just all kind of weird things. So I started looking at my story and coming across the Vikings, and I'm like, well, I don't know, that's kind of brutal, I like to have fun, but not like that. That's crazy. But looked into it more, and they actually came up with the term branding when they would brand their ships and their family crests on shields and things like that. I'm like, well, that's really interesting, So I started thinking about how that design relates to today. And design is in everything. It's from the coffee we drink to who we vote for. Everything is becoming design. So we have become Vikings. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.